Welcome to the latest episode of our film YouTube podcast this week. Today we'll be diving into the world of The Book of Fish, a film adaptation of the acclaimed, and excuse the pronunciation, Lee Ung-bok film. It's set in the 19th century. The film follows the story of a Korean scholar, Jeong Yak-jeon, who is exiled to a remote island for his political beliefs, where he starts a relationship with a fisherman named Chang Dae. Michael, I don't know how much of an asset knowledge of Korean 19th century history would have been from the beginning of this movie. I feel, obviously it's made for Korean people. I feel like if you had a grounding of Korean political history and the climate of the time, you could have dived straight into this. How much did your unfamiliarity, which I'm presuming you weren't familiar with Korean 19th century history, how much did that impact the earlier scenes of this movie for you?
Well, first of all, I'm outraged by the presumption of my ignorance on that subject matter. But you said it might, having knowledge that might equip you more from the beginning of the film. I would say for the beginning of the film, because it's really only that first 10 minutes that I felt lost, and I felt like, oh, okay, I really don't know about this subject matter and about this era, this dynasty, this king, that, like, it's a whirlwind opening 5 to 10 minutes, incredibly complex at the beginning. We should just give kind of the setup. There's basically three brothers who have been condemned by the king, the new king, because they're Catholic, and they're not following the traditional Confucian philosophy of the country. So one of them gets executed, two of them get exiled, and a hell of a lot goes on in that opening 10 minutes where I was very lost. The whole rest of the film is very straightforward and I think doesn't really require any familiarity with the topic. The only familiarity I have is not to do with Korea, but is to do with Japan, in the sense that I've seen Scorsese's film Silence, which is also about the persecution of Catholics in that part of the world. So I think we know, obviously coming from a Catholic country, that the Catholics have been out and about doing their missionary work for a long time and trying to convert the whole world. And as one would expect, there's been pushback on that. So it's kind of, once you get over the hump of the initial political situation, then it just becomes a very simple story about a older, noble, scholarly Catholic guy living in exile in a small island in the midst of a kind of fishing community, a rural, simple life that's far beneath the standing that he's lived out the rest of his life in. And then it's just a little character drama, and I think very easy to follow. But I had no extra knowledge of what was going on in the film.
Yeah, I mean, the first 10 minutes is almost accomplishes more from a feudal king's type of perspective than almost a season of Game of Thrones. It's really a kind of mishmash of political intrigue. And then, like you said, this is almost three movies in one, even though the first 10 minutes is, I don't know if you could call that the first movie, but then it's almost a fish out of water tale to an extent, where the scholar character gets put on this island. And I knew I was in trouble with how this movie would feel to me when, I don't know what you would call it, but it marmalade music maybe started piping into every scene. It has such a love for its characters, and I haven't read the book, but it has such a love for everyone in this movie that it almost, at least for the second movie, if you will, is devoid of conflict. Now I'm a big fan of especially in romances and things like that, or maybe movies, which I guess now they're called white savior movies, but when someone from a different culture enacts with a different culture, like the Last Samurai, or Dances with Wolves, where it doesn't necessarily have to be a racial thing. In this instance, it's a class thing, because we have the fisherman, who's, at least on the surface to begin with, lowborn, and we have the scholar, who is, of course, maybe could have been king if things didn't go differently. I don't know. It's not really explored. And I like the genre element of these type of movies, where it's a bit cliche, but if it's done well, this is your bread and butter with these type of movies, where there's a kind of class divide, or there's a characteristic divide of these movies, where they don't like each other to begin with, and they kind of learn to coexist. Maybe I was thinking of a different movie, but this movie explores that kind of divide a lot more philosophically. But I didn't really. It almost felt too easy in terms of how they went from like not liking each other to getting along. How did you feel about their relationship and how it evolved, and in general, really?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that it's almost too easy, because I think the whole MO of this film is easy. This film, you call it marmalade music. I would say it's got the cheesiest score I've ever come across in any film I've seen in my entire life. It's every single like plot beat, you've got the most obvious possible music in the background of that hammering home that element. And it's that I liken this movie to these films. They come out all the time. They're usually for kind of older audiences, like The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, where it's like very gentle, nice, friendly movie, the type of movies that you might watch with your parents, because you know that it's just going to be, oh, it's all nice and cute and stuff like that. And as you said, it is kind of three movies. That the beginning 10 minutes is incredibly complex. It feels like, oh my god, how am I going to follow this thing? The third act is more dark and more grounded in the harsh realities of the situation, but that feels at odds with what the heart of the film is, which is the majority, the center of the film is all a rose-tinted postcard look at the fantasy, like simplicity of rural life. And the relationship that you mentioned there, it's something that exists in pretty much all of these films, where you've got like a person who seems kind of gruff and bristles at that. I don't want anything to do with this, and their hardened exterior gets slowly worn down and melted away by like other people opening their heart to them and stuff like that. And it's got nothing to do with a specific era or a specific religious climate or anything like that. That's the kind of that it's hung around that loosely, but really it's just the relationship that we've seen 100 times before, where they're an odd couple, they don't get along, they hate each other, but they need something from each other. They've got a kind of codependent relationship, and then, oh, wouldn't you know it, they gradually come to respect and really value each other's friendship. So yeah, it's a simple story and very cliched.
Yeah, I needed a bit more get off my lawn in terms of the evolution of their relationship. Now, obviously, we haven't talked about this movie till just now, but I don't know if we're simpatico in some of the things that annoyed us, or not annoyed, but would ring alarm bells in terms of things we enjoy, because this is a very highly thought after movie, but I feel like we don't do schmaltz particularly when it's done like this. But at the same time, if you think somebody like Richard Curtis and About Time, or I think he did About a Boy as well, like that is so sweet, it will give you diabetes. So I'm wondering, in a movie like the Marigold Hotel is exactly the analogy I thought, and it was funny for something that's so specifically on the surface and cosmetically Korean. It felt like a very Western movie in its conception. So the music, like we said, very cheesy. Period piece in its conception is always a bit off-putting for me. I know it's a bit off-putting for you. How they portrayed the passage of time in this movie and told the story, they put in another element of this with him writing letters to his brother who's exiled on another island to almost denote the passage of time and how their respective apprentices were evolving, which was a device that maybe they didn't want to just have a kind of narrator of the time from the scholar, but I felt that was completely unneeded, and the relationship between their brothers was as distant as the geography between them, and it didn't really. I thought more time could have been done focused on the island and trying to reinforce the relationship between the two central characters.
I didn't have a particular problem with the correspondence with the brother. I feel like that was they're trying to illustrate the main character as being a bit of a free thinker. He's not what you'd expect, not from a scholar, not from a Catholic, not from a Korean. He does his own thing and he makes his own decisions. And his brother, who had written 200 books in exile and was a very proper scholar with a proper apprentice, and I think they were trying to establish a contrast there. I think, though, no element of this film completely works, purely because there are other elements that are so like chaotically contrasted against it. So you talk about like, we don't like schmalz. I would say I love schmalz. You mentioned a couple of directors there, and a couple of pieces of work. I love sentimentality. I love schmalz. I love films that are supposed to make you cry. Like A Better Life is a classic one in the last 20 years. I just think it has to be done well, and this film, it has that core, which is incredibly unoriginal, but at least works, which is fish out of water, guy I'm not supposed to be here, everything's different here, they do things different, what's all this? Oh, actually, maybe there's something to be said for these people's humble way of life, and vice versa. That we've seen that 1,000 times. We'll see it 1,000 times more. It's not hard to do. They do it well, but there's so many other discordant components to the film. The beginning bit is it's serious, it's violent, it's complicated. I mean, maybe if you're Korean and you know all these kings and queens and whatnot, maybe it's not that complicated. But it seems like even just tonally an unusual setup. That's not going to be the first 5-10 minutes of a Richard Curtis film, obviously. It's black and white, which seems like a bizarre decision to me, seeing as the film is so focused on romanticizing the rural life. I was reminding me of like Captain Corelli's Mandolin or something, where it's like, we just want you to think this place is stunning and beautiful and a paradise escape. It should be sun-soaked. It's got several scenes where they describe the colors of fish while they're looking at them and stuff. It just seems to be such an obviously colorful movie, and the making it black and white and set in, I think it's 1801, it's set, just conjures up the likes of Kurosawa and stuff, which couldn't be more removed tonally from the film. And then it's got that third act where it goes into more of a sort of Spielberg depression drama type thing, and even has a moment of quite brutal violence, and so it's got so many things going on that rob it from being a quality, sentimental, schmaltzy film. But at its core, in its middle hour, it undeniably is that, and exclusively that. That's what it's aiming for. So I think I like schmaltzy films, but I don't like finding out 15 minutes into a film that I'm watching a mismanaged schmaltzy film. And that's what I would say is the case with The Book of Fish.
Yeah, I didn't mean to misrepresent your love of schmaltz. I'll chase you down at the airport to apologize with a guitar.
Think
in
about
the
family
future.
films like
Right.
Home Alone with the old
Yeah.
lady who feeds the pigeons and stuff. There's like schmaltz and sentimentality with the cheesy music and all that can work really well. I just think this film didn't. It held back from that, and I don't know if that was an attempt to make the film more critically acclaimed or seem more arty than it is or something. But if that is what they're trying to do, I think they largely fail considering how cheesy and generic the majority of the film is.
Yeah, well, just to pick up on a few points you covered there, because I had a few things that spring to mind. The black and white aesthetic, it sometimes I think I'm looking at different versions of black and white, and I'm wondering if it's the copy I'm watching or if it's a slight wrinkle to the black and white presentation. It almost seemed like it was tinted with a not necessarily sepia tone. I'm not very good with colors because men only know like 5 basic colors. But and sometimes when I see black and white, I try, and this is just the film critic or whatever in me, I try and come up with a reason as to why they would pick black and white. And if it's something like Shane Meadows, you can say, okay, maybe it's as simple as the lighting. It's easier to do if you have a budget. And I always read into why they could have potentially done it. And like you said, I was watching this with my partner, and she kind of made a comment. I wish I could see the blue water that they're talking about, or I wish there's a beautiful sequence that would have been even more beautiful of the stars and this character on a boat that, given the themes and the schmaltz, it surely would have aided it. Now, my theory is that this movie wants to be, and this is why the characterization is kind of weak in a way. I feel like this movie wants to be a fable, and much like the manuscripts that the characters are writing on, they kind of want the visualization to match the aesthetic of the manuscripts and the writing. This is the writing that would bring these characters to life, and these characters are almost like a fable evolution or of how you would represent the ink that manifests these pages. Now, again, I could just be reading into it a bit too much. And the film also does this trope that when I first saw it, I think, what was it? Schindler's List. When although he doesn't use it in the same way, to be fair, but we're going to do it black and white, but we're going to give a key palette of color at specific scenes to, well, we'll let you interpret it. And in this movie, it's not really a spoiler because this is just, we get to see color in this movie at the end. My theory for that was that the characters don't appreciate the island, and they're surrounded by all this beauty and all this beautiful nature, because they're clouded in their own beliefs and their own ideologies, that they're not able to appreciate the beauty of what's around them until they have left the island and returned. Now, I don't know if that's there. I don't know if you took that from the movie itself, but at the same time, it's a 2-minute reveal for an aesthetic choice that lasts the whole movie. So I don't know your thoughts on it, or if you come up with any kind of explanation, or indeed if you thought there was one.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you got at least some theory there, because I had nothing. I had absolutely no reason to explain it. You see a blue bird for 10 seconds, and then the end credits are in color. And I think they could have there was an interesting thing to be done there, kind of like Pleasantville, where he comes to the island, his world's all black and white, it's in books, he's serious, he's got his head in books, and then over the course of the film, color kind of comes in as he awakens internally to the beautiful nature around him. That could have been interesting. I mean, I still think that there are some films, many films, that putting it in black and white wouldn't make the film worse and would potentially even make the film better and more interesting. And that this is not one of them. This is a film that absolutely needs to be in rich, beautiful color the whole way through. But yeah, the black and white did nothing for me. You said that when you watch a film in black and white, you kind of, and it's a modern film, your mind starts working on why did they make that choice. One thing that always pops into my head when I watch films, that contemporary films that are black and white, is if it's shot digitally, as this film is, it looks really weird because it doesn't accomplish a period aesthetic of, okay, this looks like an old school film. If it was shot on celluloid and it was black and white, then at least you're getting that, like Francis Ha or something like that. You're getting that kind of
right.
It's okay. This looks kind of retro, whereas when it's shot digitally and it's in black and white, it doesn't look retro to me. It just, yeah, I couldn't really figure out why they did that. I mean, other than maybe a belief on the behalf of the director or the cinematographer that black and white just always looks better. Maybe that's the way that they look at it. And I think a lot of time black and white does look really cool, but you can't, it's just not appropriate for every film, I think. And this film, I think, would have been improved. And again, it's the tonal mismanagement. Does this film think it's a serious adult intellectual drama? Because if it does, then that pulls it more towards maybe the use of black and white. But if that's what it thinks it is, then I disagree. I think that this film is a schmaltzy, sentimental, populist, a feel-good, cheesy movie, like the kind of upmarket version of a Hallmark movie or something. And that putting that in black and white is just confusing. And it didn't really add anything to the film for me personally.
Yeah, maybe in post-production of this show, I'll put a black and white filter on it and have people wonder why we made that decision. Just to move on to the final third of the movie, and I'll lead into this with something I actually did like about the movie. Well, in a sense, this movie it explores many things on the surface, but never gets into any of them, which was quite annoying. Like man's relationship with nature, isolation, colonialism. See, I'm so traumatized by that word with the Irish history, I can't even say that myself. And interacting with religion. Yeah, here we are on Easter Sunday. It couldn't be more appropriate. And none of these themes are really explored in depth in the slightest. But one thing I did like about this movie, and maybe it is done in other movies, but I liked the evolution of the characters in terms of their outlook. We have the scholar who, and this is kind of falls into things that I like in small community movies in itself. So we have this potential king who's probably isolated and never been around these type of people other than walking through his kingdom or maybe interacting with servants in the palace. And he almost practices mindfulness in a way. He's filled with these ideals and these kind of, what's the word, that the intelligentsia occupy themselves with. And just through interacting with I don't want to say simple folk, but folks living simpler lives, he's kind of drawn into a much more appreciation for nature. And this is a schmaltzy movie when he forms a relationship with the person who has a crush on him to begin with. Once I saw that, I thought, yeah, this movie is everyone gets what they want, or so I would have thought. And we have the fisherman who evolves from a very reliable guy in the village, and he's getting into spoilers now. His dad comes back at some point, and I can't remember how, but I don't think he was a nobleman, but he manages to achieve that status, and we get this almost rise and fall movie of the fisherman who quickly goes up the ranks and gets pulled away from the island, and he almost forgets his roots. He gets, his goodness gets corrupted in a system that has him doing things he doesn't even agree with. Meanwhile, we have the other character, the potential king, who comes from that system and finds his humanity, while another person comes from humble beginnings and loses his humanity. It's not an original story, but I did enjoy that element, and that's one of the few times where the themes are actually explored through the characters.
Yeah, I think the way the relationships evolve is, you know, it's good. When the middle of the film is, as we've said many times, it's very generic, it's very formulaic, it's the usual beats that you get in this kind of a story, and they work for a reason. They're repeated for a reason. We've seen them many times, we'll see them many times again. It is satisfying when someone wants something and then they get that thing. Someone has a conflict, that conflict is resolved. Two people don't like each other, then they like each other. There's someone who's not nice, then they get their comeuppance. Like just the standard kind of conveyor belt of generic filmmaking is satisfying, and it's done well here. Like this film is not like incompetent. The actors are fine. The direction, my issue is really with the script and certain aesthetic choices, but in terms of like your sort of technical filmmaking of directing, editing, acting, it's fine. It's all good. The final act of the film, where things get, I suppose to some extent that the film is beholden to what actually happened to these characters. So as much as it can turn a section of this guy's life into a schmaltzy postcard film, it ultimately has to reconcile with how things actually went down for him, and all of the characters involved. And this is over 200 years ago at a seemingly quite a hard time in Korean history. So things are they end up shaking out a little darker, I suppose, than would naturally fit with this film if it was purely a work of fiction. So that, in a way, without getting too much into spoilers, it kind of robs you of some of the beats that if you were just writing this on a fiction level, you would have included and would have probably made the film even more satisfying. But my favorite thing in this film is in the heart of the film, in the middle hour, is just fun on a small island. I love island culture. I love rural culture. We both grew up in the country, and though I had my issues with that while I was growing up, now I have great reverence and romance for it, and I look at it through rose-tinted glasses. So if I'm watching a piece of work that also looks at rural living through rose-tinted glasses, I find that quite enjoyable. So the relationship was at its best for me when it was that kind of master apprentice, Karate Kid type situation, essentially.
Yeah, well, I remember we got into not to say a disagreement, but you kind of broke my heart when I finally did recommend the Karate Kid to you, and you go, I remember the word you said cut me deep. You're like, Mr. Miyagi and Daniel's relationship wasn't that deep, man. And so the fact that you're even bringing up the Karate Kid is like, I'll contextualize what that means to the viewers right now.
Yeah, I missed the boat on that one. I didn't watch it at the right age, but I can still use it as like an icon of that kind of relationship.
Yeah. Well, you tried to avoid spoilers, but we'll get into spoilers for the final few minutes. You mentioned the best exotic marigold hotel. This is the equivalent of if, I don't know, Judi Dench cut off Bill Nighy's penis and served it as a dish swerve of a final act of this movie, because I didn't think we were going. I don't think in my wildest dreams I thought we could have got anything like a tonal shift of the final third of this movie, because it just doesn't. I didn't see any indication, even in the interactions between the characters of the island, in terms of any kind of conflict. Even the governor is kind of a bumbling idiot who's kind of a bit of a joke. Even there's one scene where the fisherman he disobeys. Can't remember what he does, but he disobeys something and he gets spanked. And that, not to say that scene is played for laughs, but it's certainly not graphic violence. And yeah, just the final third, when the fisherman character gets to the mainland, and he's obviously, basically there seems to be attacks for everything in this movie. The movie gets very violent and very like gritty almost, especially considering what came before that. And you mentioned this is a movie to watch with your mother or your grandmother, your family. And if that is, I'm not saying that's the target audience that it's aimed at, but it's certainly the target audience for 3/4 of the film who are going to enjoy the movie and have a very positive experience with the movie. I'm wondering, because for me that tonal shift was just jarring, and it just seemed very misplaced. And not since I think Moonlight had there been such a change in a final act in terms of characterization and what had come before it. I'm just wondering how that final act hit you and how you felt about it, because it's such a tonal shift.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I'm watching it just as a film. I don't have any connection to the culture, the history, so I'm just looking for the natural third act to this film, because it's been so generic for so long. So it's kind of like if I'm watching I don't know, a Transformers movie or something like that, then by the time I get to the third act, I just want the third act of a Transformers movie. At that point, I'm not looking for a completely different movie to come in, even though that's potentially interesting. It's like, why would I even have bothered watching this film in the first place? But one thing that does occur to me is here in Europe, we're very familiar with the Holocaust, and we constantly make really schmaltzy movies about the Holocaust, like Life is Beautiful or Jojo Rabbit, or these kind of things where it's just all feel good, rosy thing. And when it comes to the hard stuff, you know, the killing and all that, it's not that hard. It's because we're so familiar with it, and it's such an inevitable part of the fabric of telling stories about the Holocaust, that you can put that in and it doesn't completely mess up the tone of the film. And I think if you're Korean, possibly, when you get to that third act of the film and you see there, it's kind of like a Great Depression type situation where it's all about economic hardship and how like the taxing and how like the toll it's taking on people, and you get to, you know, one pretty hardcore scene and you get to just some real darkness. I think if you are Korean and you're watching that, you might not, you might be like, well, we're watching a film set in 1801. There's going to be that's in every movie set in 1801 kind of thing. So it might feel less out of place if you're going into the film feeling like this is a film about that period and that era. So like if we watched a film set in Ireland during the occupation, and it was set, the IRA were in it and stuff like that, it could be a very schmaltzy, rose-tinted, feel-good movie. But if it had some executions here and there in the film, that wouldn't be too dramatic a tonal shift for us, because we'd be like, this is what's going on. They're just choosing to make a comedy or something like that in this world. Whereas us not knowing anything about Korean history, I think when that stuff comes in, it's like, whoa, we were headed here the whole time. When he was trying to become a nobleman and all that was where he would inevitably be ending up. Yeah, it seems, yeah, more jarring to us. So I think there is definitely a few elements in this film that made me think this is made for Korean audiences. And even just the fact the film opens, it says this film is based on the preface to the Book of Fish. And we're watching a film about the writing of the Book of Fish, and I suppose at the end we see him writing the preface and about how he met this young man who was a fisherman who was really wise beyond his years and all that kind of stuff. Like, it maybe the Book of Fish is a really important work there, and is something that, you know, like if we saw a book about the writing of the Book of Kells, or we saw a movie about that, or it might be like, okay, I know why you'd make a film about this because it's famous. And even the film constantly references these other texts. Like, he's only halfway through the 4 core texts or whatever it is, you know, that there's seemingly like a syllabus of classical knowledge in Korean literature, at least back then. And there's a number of little pieces of specificity that I think we might be missing out on some of the equation when we watch it.
Yeah, that's an astute observation. That, yeah, because when you come to a movie as an outsider, do you know what it's like? It's like when you're watching a music biopic, and you know they always have this scene where there's it's so cliche. There's a garden party, and then someone might shout, "Oh!" Like, I don't know, and it's like, I can't think of any musicians off the top of my head, but it's
just think of any song, one song you gotta think.
Yeah. Just the Beatles, like the Beatles are there as kids or something. They probably didn't know each
other. I want to hold
like,
your hand.
Yeah. It's like, or like Ringo, George, and then you go, like,
or someone starts playing a riff and it's like bum 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 bum, and then the audience is supposed to go, oh, that song.
Yeah.
Whereas if you don't know the band, you're just like, I guess that's a famous thing.
Yeah. It's just you're meant to fill in the blanks. And I guess what Ollie said, like the Book of Kells is a good analogy, because I wouldn't be wondering they wouldn't have to do a good job of explaining why the Book of Kells is important, because we're Irish. We're like, oh yeah, the Book of Kells, that's a thing. But as someone watching it, was like, the Book of Fish is never explored in this movie beyond any reason why it should be famous in the slightest. But if you're Korean, you're probably like, oh, the Book of Fish, I remember reading about this in school. So yeah, that is a good point. But, and yeah, maybe I don't know if he haruki himself. Did he stab himself the same way that the Japanese
what, the main character?
Not the main character.
No.
That scene where
he castrates himself. He takes like his little scythe or sickle or whatever, and does a number on himself. Yeah, and I mean, it honestly, but that scene is both tonally too extreme for the film that we're watching, but also it just, I don't even really buy it. Like, I mean, I say that, and now it'll probably go on Wikipedia, this actually happened, this guy did that. I reckon,
yeah.
Maybe it did happen, but even if it did happen in real life, I don't buy it with those characters in this movie. There's no depth to them. They're just like random, they're borderline extras. They're in one scene, they're poor peasants, they're being exploited and robbed by the powers that be, and they're going through like a terrible situation, but like what he does to himself won't change or accomplish anything. He's already got kids and stuff, and it's just, I know it's a protest, it's like the monk throwing gasoline on him and lighting himself on fire or whatever, but it's it's just, it's unearned, really. And
yeah, that's how I felt.
I think we had already got there in terms of establishing that this guy doesn't want to be part of that corrupt apparatus anymore. We didn't need that to push him over the edge. In fact, it's almost baffling why he ever wanted to be a part of that. Like, I assumed for the whole movie, he wants to be a scholar. He wants to be, a guy working like in libraries with books and stuff. But if he always knew that he was just going to become sort of a councilman or whatever he is, then that doesn't really wash with his academic interests, or just the whole trajectory of that character I thought was a bit clumsy, and everything that they set up in order to achieve it, like all of the guys that he ends up working with are just such pantomime villains of what corruption is. Thin.
Yeah, and that's where the fable aspect of it comes into it as well, because you don't need, well, in my opinion, you always do, but you don't need characterization if every character is meant to embody like greed, wisdom, innocence. And I was having a conversation. I can't even name drop because I can't remember his name, but the guy who wrote a lot of Ken Loach's movies, and I asked him, how does he strike a balance between characters feeling authentic and characters being used to discuss these issues? And it's the hardest thing to do, but I don't think the film was even interested in doing that. And what it did try and do in terms of the fisherman character, they did out of nowhere to lead into this final third anyway. But I'm presuming that was in the interest of fables and kind of moral, kind of much like the poetry and the phrases that they were kind of trying to exude throughout the movie. It very much was just peripheral, really. But yeah, I think I don't really have anything else to say. I'm trying to. It's sad when you can't think of a whole plethora of positives to say about this movie, because it is very highly renowned, and it's probably maybe it is culturally significant to people in Korea. But I don't think I don't think I could recommend this movie to anyone, really, because of the tonal shift as well. Like if I said, "Ma'am, there's a good movie you'll enjoy," she wouldn't have appreciated that final third.
Yeah, I think my mother probably would enjoy it because it's got that cheesy center, and then it's kind of interesting, like in the way that National Geographic is interesting at the end. It doesn't work, I think, as a film, as a piece of entertainment all the way through, but at least you get like a good sort of hour 15 minutes in the middle, which is just well executed cheesy thing. And what I'll also say about the film is, like, I didn't hate it. I think it's largely inoffensive. It's not, you can't really hate it. It's relatively easy to watch. It's got plenty of nice stuff in the middle, and then if I was trying to sit down and watch a schmaltzy feel-good movie, there's probably about 50 that I'd pick before this one. But it does, for most of its runtime, at least accomplish that thing. And then, some people, they just like watching anything set in the past because they get to see some little historical details that are interesting to me. So that's an element of it as well.
Yeah. All right, we'll leave it there. So, Michael, we'll have you back on soon. Many thanks as always.
Pleasure.